Most people walk through life believing a fundamental lie. It is a lie that is whispered in schools, reinforced at dinner tables, and broadcast across every media channel. The lie is simple. Wealth is about earning more money. We are told that if we just work harder, if we just grind longer, if we just get that next promotion or that slightly better hourly wage, we will eventually cross the threshold into financial freedom. But they are wrong. You are wrong. There is a hidden game being played right in front of our eyes. It is a game with invisible rules, a game that the wealthy understand intuitively, and a game that keeps the majority of the population trapped in a cycle of perpetual struggle. Until you see this game, until you truly understand the mechanics of the board you are standing on, no amount of strategy, no amount of savings tips, and no amount of hard work will ever make you truly wealthy. You need to watch this carefully. You need to listen with an open mind, because we are going to dismantle the system that keeps most people poor. We are going to expose the machinery of poverty and the architecture of wealth. And most importantly, we are going to look at how understanding these hidden rules changes absolutely everything. Today, we are not just talking about money. We are looking at the fundamental question of wealth. Why do people with limited resources misunderstand what wealth actually is? And why does this specific misunderstanding act as a cage, keeping them constrained regardless of their effort? We have spent a long time researching this. We have looked at the data, the sociology, and the psychology of money. And what we have found is that those who truly understand wealth do so for very specific structural reasons. And those who don't, they often believe they understand it. They think they know how money works, but in reality, they are operating on a completely different operating system. Illusion of success, survivorship bias. To understand this, we first have to talk about how we learn about money. We have to talk about survivorship bias. This is a concept that explains why most financial advice is actually dangerous. Think about the books you see in the airport bookstore. Think about the podcasts you listen to. They are almost exclusively about the winners. We study the billionaires. We study the investment moguls. We study the people who started a business in a garage and sold it for billions. But we ignore the graveyard. We ignore the millions of people who did the exact same things, who followed the same advice, who took the same risks, who worked just as hard and failed. For every famous investor who made a fortune, there are thousands who invested in the exact same market at the exact same time, using the same principles, and lost everything. But we don't write biographies about them. We don't put them on magazine covers. So all of our collective financial wisdom comes from the survivors. And here is the trap. Survivor advice does not necessarily work for people who aren't survivors yet. You need to burn this into your mind. Just because a wealthy person does something, it does not mean that doing that thing will make you wealthy. Let's take a common example. We know that wealthy people invest heavily in the stock market. They have diversified portfolios. They understand asset allocation. So the advice given to a poor person is invest in the stock market. But investing in the stock market doesn't guarantee wealth. Reading financial literacy books doesn't guarantee wealth. The context matters. If you already have wealth, then investing in the stock market is a brilliant strategy. Why? Because you have capital that you do not need for your immediate survival. You have money that can sit there untouched for 10 or 20 years. If you are wealthy, you become intimate with the concept of compound growth because you have the luxury of time. You have the flexibility to let the math work in your favor. But if you need that money to pay rent next week, the stock market isn't an investment vehicle, it's a gambling machine. So what is the difference? What is the gap between simply having money and understanding wealth? Economic studies are very clear on this. Financial literacy, knowing what an APR is or how a bond works, does not determine your financial outcome. You can know everything there is to know about money, but if you don't understand the structure of wealth, you will remain limited. But if you grasp the underlying game, you have the potential to create stability that lasts not just for your life, but for generations. The architecture of the mind. how we perceive reality. Let's go deeper. Let's look at the psychological architecture of the wealthy versus those with limited resources. We need to look at three specific pillars: time, assets, and risk. Pillar 1, the perception of time. The first major difference is how these two groups perceive time. People with limited resources are forced to live in the now. For them, wealth is about liquidity. It's about having cash in hand today. If a person struggling to get by suddenly sees $10,000 in their bank account, they feel rich. That money represents immediate relief. It represents the ability to solve today's problems. But if a wealthy person has $10,000 sitting in a checking account, they see it as a failure. They see it as dead capital. To them, it is almost nothing because it isn't doing anything. The poor think in terms of hours, days, weeks, and maybe months. Can I pay rent this month? Can I buy groceries this week? Will the car last until Friday? Their horizon is pressed up against their nose. The wealthy think in terms of decades and generations. They aren't asking, can I buy groceries? They are asking, will this asset provide income for my grandchildren? How will this real estate portfolio look in 20 years? Because they are thinking on completely different timescales, they make completely different decisions. A person in the scarcity mindset saves money in a low-interest bank account because they might need it next Tuesday. They need accessibility. A wealthy person rarely keeps money idle in a bank because idle money does not create time. And that is the key. The poor focus on money. The wealthy focus on controlling time. Pillar 2, income versus assets. The second difference is the confusion between income and assets. This is the trap that catches the middle class. Most people believe that a high salary equals wealth. They see a doctor earning $300,000 a year and they think that person is rich. But a wealthy person looks at that doctor and sees a high income worker. They do not see wealth. Why? Because if the doctor stops working, the money stops flowing, the doctor is on a hamster wheel. A very expensive gold-plated hamster wheel, but a hamster wheel nonetheless. Their lifestyle is entirely dependent on their active labor. Compare this to a landlord who owns a portfolio of humble rental properties generating $100,000 a year. The landlord earns significantly less than the doctor on paper. But the landlord is wealthier. Why? Because the properties generate that income whether the landlord gets out of bed or not. The poor and the middle class focus on earning income. They want a raise. They want overtime. The wealthy focus on ownership and equity. They want assets. They want to acquire things that generate value independently of their time. The poor work for money. The wealthy build systems that make money work for them. This is why when you tell someone with limited resources to invest, they often recoil. To them, putting money into an asset feels like losing money. It feels like that cash is gone. To a wealthy person, investing feels like planting a seed. They know the fruit is coming later. Pillar 3, the perception of risk. The third pillar is risk. This is where the divide becomes a chasm. People with limited resources are taught that a job is safe and a business is risky. A steady paycheck is the ultimate security. Wealthy people view this as backward. They see dependence on a single income source, a job that can be taken away by a bad boss or a market downturn as the ultimate risk. They view multiple income streams, even if they are variable, as the only true safety. Imagine a person earning $50,000 a year. They hate their job, it drains them, but they stay because quitting seems like jumping off a cliff. It seems too dangerous. A wealthy person looks at that same situation and thinks, one income source? That is terrifying. I am entirely exposed. I need to diversify immediately to protect myself. The poor optimize for stability within scarcity. They are trying not to lose. The wealthy embrace calculated risk because they have a safety net. They are playing to win. This is why advice like start a business or invest in yourself sounds insane to people who don't have a financial cushion. If you miss a paycheck and you're homeless, you don't take risks. You survive. The myth of delayed gratification. Now we have to address a very popular, very damaging myth, delayed gratification. We are told constantly that wealthy people are just better at waiting. We are told they have more willpower. They can resist the marshmallow test. But think about this carefully. People with limited resources delay gratification every single day of their lives. They skip meals to feed their kids. They wear old clothes until they fall apart. They rarely go on vacation. They work through sickness. Their entire existence is an exercise in delaying gratification. But here's the difference. They delay gratification without the certainty of a reward. They sacrifice today just to survive tomorrow. Wealthy people delay gratification, yes, but they do it knowing the reward is mathematically guaranteed. They invest today because they know the compound interest will pay off. They delay buying the sports car today so they can buy the dealership tomorrow. The difference isn't willpower. The difference is certainty. A poor person buying a small luxury, a nice meal, a new pair of shoes, is acting rationally. They are grabbing a moment of joy in a life of uncertainty. Avoiding that joy doesn't guarantee them a mansion in 10 years. So why wait? The core concept, subtraction versus multiplication, all of these differences, time, assets, risk, gratification, point to one singular overarching reality. People with limited resources and wealthy individuals are playing two entirely different economic games. I call this the subtraction game versus the multiplication game. If you understand nothing else, understand this. The subtraction game, people with limited resources play the subtraction game. In this game, you start with a small, finite pool of resources. Every decision you make is a subtraction. You pay rent, subtraction. You buy food, subtraction. The car breaks down, a massive subtraction. The goal of the subtraction game is simply to make the money last until the reset button, payday. There is no growth. There is only management of decline. The multiplication game, wealthy people play the multiplication game. In this game, every expense is viewed through the lens of potential growth. They spend money on a dinner. It's networking to get a new deal. Multiplication. They take out a loan. It's cheap debt to buy an asset that grows in value. Multiplication. They pay for education. It's acquiring skills that increase earning power. Multiplication. The goal of this game is to increase the total surface area of their wealth over time. Let's look at how this plays out in real life. The car breakdown, when a poor person's car breaks down, it is a disaster. It costs $500 they don't have. It might mean they can't get to work, which means they lose wages, which means they can't pay rent. It creates a spiral of subtraction. When a wealthy person's car breaks down, it is an annoyance. It is a minor friction cost. It does not affect their ability to generate income. It does not threaten their housing. The systemic impact is zero. Debt in the subtraction game, debt is a shackle. High interest credit cards, payday loans, these are tools that subtract future labor for present survival. In the multiplication game, debt is a tool. It is a lever. A low-interest mortgage allows you to control an appreciating asset with the bank's money. You are using debt to multiply your net worth. You cannot win a multiplication game using subtraction strategies. This even applies to health. A wealthy person views their body as their primary asset. They invest in it proactively. They go to the gym. They eat organic food. They get checkups. They are multiplying their longevity and their energy. A person with limited resources delays treatment. They ignore the pain in their tooth because the dentist is expensive. They eat cheap, processed food because it fills bellies for less money. This is rational within their constraints, but it leads to a subtraction of health capital later on. The barrier to entry, why advice fails this, brings us to the ultimate tragedy of financial advice. The advice that works for the wealthy assumes you are already playing the multiplication game. It assumes you have surplus money. It assumes you have time. It assumes you have a safety net. When you tell someone playing the subtraction game to leverage debt or invest for the long term, you are giving them instructions for a sport they are not playing. Even if someone with limited resources intellectually understands the concept of wealth, acting on it is nearly impossible. To switch games requires three things: capital to invest, time for growth, a safe environment to fail. Without all three, wealth accumulation is an uphill battle against gravity. This is why we see the phenomenon of class affection. When someone tries to transition from the subtraction game to the multiplication game, they often have to leave their community behind. They have to change their environment. They have to adopt a new mindset that alienates them from their friends and family. Immersion in wealth culture through mentorship, elite education, or corporate networks is necessary to learn the new rules. But doing so disconnects you from your origin. You become a stranger to your own people, yet you never quite feel like you belong among the wealthy. That psychological tension is unbearable for many. The stability of the system. The system stays stable because this confusion benefits everyone in a dark way. People with limited resources maintain psychological comfort by believing they are doing the right things. I'm working hard, I'm saving, I'm a good person, I just need a lucky break. This belief protects their ego. It prevents the crushing realization that their strategy is structurally flawed. Wealthy individuals maintain their advantage because the masses do not understand the rules. If everyone truly understood how capital worked, they would demand structural change. They would question the distribution of resources. But as long as the poor believe they are just temporarily embarrassed millionaires playing the same game, the system remains unchallenged. The lottery of birth. When we ask why some families build generational wealth while others remain trapped in poverty for centuries, the answer is rarely intelligence. It is rarely work ethic. It is about which game you are drafted into at birth. Those born into multiplication households learn multiplication by osmosis. They watch their parents invest. They hear conversations about equity at the dinner table. They are encouraged to take risks because there is a trust fund or a safety net to catch them. Those born into subtraction households learn subtraction. They watch their parents stress over bills. They learn that money is scarce, that risk is dangerous, and that the goal of life is to survive the month. Switching games requires abandoning your foundational beliefs. It requires rewiring your brain. It requires changing your social surroundings. It is a transition that most people statistically will never make. The trap of safe choices. This is why so many people feel stuck. They follow the rules. They read the books. They listen to the gurus. But nothing changes. They are still operating with a subtraction mindset. Every time they try to apply a multiplication strategy, it feels wrong. It feels reckless. They focus on the cost, not the potential. They feel the loss of the money leaving their account, not the potential of the asset growing. It also explains why luck seems so dominant. When we look at a self-made success story, we often ignore the hidden safety nets. We ignore the timing. We ignore the fact that they were in an environment that permitted failure. Without those factors, even the smartest, hardest working person might never break through. When someone with limited resources looks at the choices of a wealthy person, it can feel impossible to replicate. They see networks they don't have. They see credit lines they can't access. And because the consequences of failure for the poor are catastrophic, homelessness, hunger, ruin, they choose the path that is safe. They choose the path that guarantees they stay limited. This is rational. From their perspective, playing it safe is the only move that makes sense. Breaking the cycle. So is it hopeless? No. But it requires a level of honesty that is uncomfortable. The difference between wealth and poverty isn't just money. It is access, perspective, and freedom. You can know the math of compound interest, but if you don't have the freedom to let that money sit for 20 years, the math doesn't matter. The paradox is striking. People with limited resources often cling to beliefs that comfort them. I'm doing my best, but admitting the truth that the game you have been playing your whole life is designed to keep you poor is painful. It means admitting that your hard work has been misdirected. It means realizing that survival strategies are the enemy of growth strategies. It is easier to stay confused than to confront that reality. But here is the real insight. Here is the glimmer of light. Knowledge alone is not the pathway. You cannot just learn your way out of the subtraction game. You must systematically change your environment. Recognize the game. The first step is realizing you're playing the subtraction game. Stop beating yourself up for not winning the multiplication game with subtraction tools. Create a buffer. Before you can multiply, you must stop subtracting. The first goal isn't to get rich. It's to create a localized safety net, a small emergency fund, a reduction of high interest debt. You need to create a tiny pocket of multiplication conditions within your subtraction life. Shift the mindset. You must force yourself to see expenses as investments. You must force yourself to take calculated risks, even small ones. You must seek out communities that play the multiplication game, even if you feel like an imposter at first. Value time over money. This is the hardest shift. You must begin to make decisions that buy you time, not just things. Conclusion: the revolutionary act. Most people do not fail because they are lazy. They do not fail because they are stupid. They fail because they are using subtraction strategies in a multiplication world. They are trying to survive when the rules reward those who multiply. Understanding this is revolutionary. It stops the shame spiral. It stops the feeling of personal inadequacy. It forces you to question everything you've been taught. It forces you to look at your parents' advice, your teacher's advice, and your friend's advice and ask, is this advice for survival or is it for growth? For a few of you, this realization offers the possibility of changing the trajectory, not just for yourself, but for your children. If you can stop teaching them subtraction and start teaching them multiplication, even if you have very little money to start with, you change their destiny. You cannot win a game if you do not understand the rules, and you cannot change your life if you do not recognize which game you are playing. Awareness is the first step. Strategy is the second. Action is the third. The question is not whether you can get rich. The question is, will you learn to play the right game?